Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, TIFF Senior International Programmer for Canada, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Ian Harnarine, a writer and director who broke out on the festival circuit with the 2011 short Doubles with Slight Pepper, starring Sanjeev Boodoo and Errol Sudhal as a Trinidadian street vendor and his ailing father in Canada. A decade later, Ian reunited his stars for a feature-length version, Doubles, which premiered at the Canadian Film Fest earlier this spring, had a theatrical run in Canada and Trinidad earlier this summer, and arrives on digital and on demand today. It's good. You should check it out. Ian picked The Harder They Come, Perry Henzell's 1972 outlaw epic starring reggae superstar Jimmy Cliff as a Jamaican musician named Ivanhoe, whose career is derailed by dirty producers and even dirtier cops, leading him to take on all of Kingston in a campaign of revenge, even as his music becomes an anthem for the people. The first feature film produced in Kingston, it became a cult hit with a massive international following, thanks to a soundtrack that brought Jimmy Cliff, Toots and the Maytals, Desmond Dekker, and other reggae acts out to the larger world. It's a blast, and if you've never seen it, you're going to want to rectify that as soon as possible. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I don't know. I feel like it's been forgotten as like this gem of world cinema, which is part of the reason why I want to talk to you about it, because I don't know, obviously like world cinema is, has its pitfalls in terms of what's considered world cinema.
Yep.
And I think this is like one of those films that's always forgotten.
Well, I guess the pertinent question then is, when did you first experience it? Because I remember it as the thing that was always playing midnights at the Bloor when I was a kid. And I wasn't old enough.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it would have been like the early 80s, I think, or the mid 80s. And it was a midnight movie only because no one else knew where to put it, right? In terms of cult films. And at that time, it just was midnight. And I assume part of that is probably because, people were smoking during it and it was a whole extra thing culturally to be the cool white boy who goes and sees, The Harder They Come with a joint. But I did not experience it that way. I was too young. I caught up to it probably in the early 90s when I had the time to really just dig into everything that was out there. But it felt like a curio to me, but I was like, I was not the target audience. The whole point of it is that it's a film made for Kingston by people in Kingston, right? So yeah, what was your first experience of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I try to remember when it was, and the experiences at the Bloor sounds amazing. I wish I could have been the time travel back there to that, but it would have been like the early 2000s or so, I want to say. I was studying at York, like I was studying physics at York, and I started to get interested in movies, not necessarily as like a profession or like as a creator, as a director. I was just interested in watching things. And my dad, who had immigrated before he came to Toronto, he lived in Chicago for many, many years. And he definitely had like, he had really good taste in movies at the time. And so every Friday night, like York has a phenomenal, film library. I'm assuming they still have it, called the Sound and Moving Image Library, SMIL. We used to call it for short.
Nice.
And every like Friday or Saturday night, like I'd go to the library and pick something out, and he would tell me, he'd be like, you know what? If you want to watch good movies, we'll watch, you got to get Midnight Cowboy. We watched Midnight Cowboy together. We've got to watch, like I'd never seen Easy Rider before. Like that blew my mind. And so that movie, I'm pretty sure The Harder They Come was one of his suggestions that we watched. And I'm talking about like VHS, right? At the time. And so I remember watching it for the first time and just being, kind of blown away. Like first, kind of looked terrible, but I didn't mind that. It was just more, I was just like, I've never seen a movie with people talking like that. And, there's some like hokey moments, like some of like the, the violence and stuff like that, the way it's handled, and like the blood and whatever else. But like, I was still just in awe of the authenticity of it. And that's what originally struck me about it.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize until I revisited the Criterion disc and read the note, which has disappeared from the internet entirely, but there's a little booklet insert that it's just pure facts. It's just like, it played at this market, it was picked up by these distributors, it happened this way. But what I didn't realize, it's the first feature-length film produced, supposedly, or at least that's how it was marketed, in Jamaica, and that it was shot on 16 millimeter by people who just wanted to do an outlaw story. Like Ivanhoe is based on an actual person, a Robin Hood sort of guy from the 50s, and the fusion of outlaw and musician, like it's established mythology now. It's sort of the lore, the troubadour thing that makes perfect sense for an exploitation movie. But this isn't an exploitation movie. That's the thing that's like the violence is a little bit kind of broader because they wanted to sell it and they want crowds to cheer. But this is the most kitchen sinky exploitation movie I've ever seen. Like you are just immersed immediately, on a bus with people talking about a mango right from the jump. Like this is a world, not a story. And the idea that this becomes a cult film because of the reggae soundtrack, not because of the exoticism or the curiosity. Those are things they didn't market because reggae was the way in. But looking back, it doesn't feel like a breakthrough music film. It just feels like a breakthrough, full stop.
Yeah, time has been really kind to this movie, and every
Yeah.
time I revisit it, the more I am just kind of in awe of it. Like the criticisms of, Christianity and like that exists. Like I've never seen that in a film, particularly from the Caribbean perspective.
Hmm.
It's really remarkable. And then again, like when you really listen to the lyrics to The Harder They Come, it's telling the whole story of the movie basically. But again, like it's so critical of a lot of these things that maybe I just never picked up on or never really understood um, how right they got it with like those feelings.
Yeah, I mean, it's what, 52 years now that since it was shot, and it,
That's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't feel like it feels like all great dramas of their moment. It feels like a time capsule, right? Because you're seeing the world as it was, or a version of the world as it was. But there's nothing in it that feels exaggerated or outlandish, and people just speaking in kind of, I don't know what the term is. It's not naturalism exactly, but there is a kind of fly on the wall feeling to the whole project. Like nobody knows exactly what the final product will be, so they're very relaxed and just there are scenes where it just feels like people are wandering into the film and existing and wandering out again. And I don't mean that in a negative. I mean it's just so observational that even though it's a complete fiction and people are playing roles and characters and everything, it feels like you've just been sent to this place. It feels like a transmission.
Yeah. You talked about how much things have changed since then, but when I recently rewatched it, I was actually struck by how much things haven't changed, right? Like, in like that sort of opening montage with the bus going from the rural area to the city. There's that one bridge that only has room for one vehicle. There's somebody's got to back up. You've got to let somebody else pass.
Yeah.
And like the market that they go through, I was just in Trinidad last week with the film, and the market looks exactly like that. Like these problems in these countries, like these developing countries, they haven't gone away. Like the corruption, the echoes of colonization, all of these things are still there. It's taken different forms, but they're still like one lane bridges for people to go by. Like getting transportation is still a problem in these countries. It's so like you're right, like so much has changed, but so much hasn't changed even in these 50 years, which is again, I think really interesting to see.
And it also, I was trying to figure out, like, is that opening shot of the bus and the truck confronting each other with the zoom, like it obviously that whole thing is set up, but it feels dangerous. It
Oh,
feels like that.
it feels totally dangerous.
Yeah. But it's also
And
this great metaphor for Ivan colliding with the city, right? Like
right.
the old thing, like there are only two narratives. A man goes on a journey or a stranger comes to town. And here we have the introduction of this guy, and he's really just a passenger. Like nothing has happened to him yet. He hasn't
Right.
become the person he was. But this is his introduction to a place where he's coming home. He's been here before, but the first thing that he encounters is an obstacle, and then everything else in the film will flow from there.
Yeah, the first few minutes, again, like it's sort of like and it's like he does such a great job, the director, throughout the film with these sort of musical montages of just covering a lot of ground. and using like the music, using sound as glue to stick all of these different things together. It's just like elegant filmmaking. And like, again, the more I pay attention to the craft in the film, the more I really appreciate what's happening through it.
And it's such a miracle that they got Jimmy Cliff too. Like just as from a point of performance, he is so comfortable and so confident. Again, it's just like, who is this person on the screen who is so completely occupying that space? Like there is a movie star quality to the way he barely even opens his eyes in some scenes. Like he's just it's like it's so weird. I was thinking of Brando here and there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Just the way he takes things in and waits to respond. That like you can't teach that.
You can't teach that. It's just like obviously with like someone there's this an enormous amount of charisma
Mm.
and the camera and I just don't know. There's moments where I'm like, okay, he's clearly aware of the camera, what's happening here. But there are other moments where it seems like if he's not, and he's just really in the moment. Like in the recording studio scene
Yeah, yeah,
where,
yeah.
they're recording The Harder They Come and he's singing it. Like this is a man that's just clearly in the zone in that moment. And the costume is fantastic. Like he's wearing the star shirt, and it's just I'm lucky that the camera was rolling in that moment because it feels like a historical document at that point.
It does. And there are movies here and there where you get the sense that either this wasn't planned and became part of it, like this part of the world was added once they realized they had gold, or they wrote into it, right, and they took it there. But I truly don't know, and I know the story of it is so. The story of its production is so frantic and patchy. They ran out of money. They went through so many different cinematographers. The post production process was a mess, and this you would not know it. Like you would not know it to look at it. It feels of a piece with itself from the beginning to the end, and it does have like it is this weird fusion, this mashup of musical and action film and heroic underdog story. But it's an accident. I think it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, the miracle. I mean, we all know how hard it is to make a movie. It's even harder to make a good movie, and to put something off like this, where it's kind of unprecedented when they were making it. That's just even more obstacles, and even more unlikely that this film gets made and is successful, let alone being good. Um, because of like and I don't know if it's a matter of like we've got to get everything into this movie. Like you said, like there's the spaghetti western angle, which is in there, the violence, the music. Let's just try to appeal to as many people as possible,
Mm-hmm.
whatever's cool at the time. But somehow it works, And it's got to be because of Jimmy Cliff, right? But because he's so phenomenal. But again, the more I pay attention to it, the more I notice the craft and how intentional some things were, and frankly, just how audacious some of it is, in terms of its aesthetic that it's going for.
Yeah, I mean, is it the kind of thing that, well, you say you come back to it a lot. How often do you revisit it, and like, what do you take away every time? Is there like an editing pass and a cinematography pass? Do you actually pay attention to different things, or is it just that stuff strikes you?
Yeah, I'd say probably about once a year. I've been looking at it,
Oh yeah,
um, and yeah, sometimes like there's a scene where the editing is just really, really good, and I never noticed it that way. Or again, like I'm struck by the performances time and time again. Um, and when thinking back and trying to observe, trying to figure out on set if like performances are good or not, it's striking, and I wonder if they knew it was good in the moment. Like if it would have this lasting resonance that it does have. Um, so yeah, I'm not. I can't say that when I look at it, I'm saying I'm only going to look at the cinematography now, or I'm only going to pay attention to the sound. It's just something pulls out every single time different. Um, and that's what makes repeated viewings of this movie so satisfying for me.
yeah. There is something wonderful about being able to go back to something every time and just know you're gonna get in deeper. Like the example I always use is the single take fairy scene in Jaws, which like it took me 10 years to notice it was a wonder because I never paid attention to the way it was framed. I was just into the scene and watching the dialogue is incredible. The way that they bring characters, or like the way they bring Brody around to not doing anything. They go out to the kids who are swimming, and by the time they get there, he's already been talked out of it, out of stopping them from swimming. So they come back in, and we get to watch them. And it's a single take, and it just didn't register until, I don't know, maybe I had to be older and to appreciate the mechanisms of it. But watching a movie that way, it's like, I don't think we do it to learn exactly. I think we just become so familiar that we can start to see things that we just took for granted before. But yeah, Harder They Come is such an odd test case for what a movie can be, right? Like I can, like you mentioned Easy Rider, and it's exactly the same sort of film. Like this, there had not been a movie like this before, and then someone just went and made it.
Yeah, and he's obviously really skilled person. Like, and from what I know about him, he started Henzell, the director. He started off as he's Jamaican, goes off to London,
Mm-hmm.
starts working for the BBC, realizes the future is going to be this, and goes back to Jamaica and starts a production company where they're just making commercials. And so, I imagine during that time, he's assembling like a really good crew. He's assembling like storytelling techniques. Like he knows how to make this movie, but then it still takes a really long time to make it.
Yeah.
And you're right, because it's just like, after facing some of these obstacles he's faced, like, how do you get people to understand what it is you're doing when it hasn't been done before?
Yeah.
That to me is what I admire about the making of the film as well.
Yeah, you had mentioned that it's the kind of movie that throws everything in, and it does have a little bit of first novel syndrome, right? Where you're afraid you might never get another shot.
Yeah. Yeah, and frankly, he really didn't. I mean, like he made Knowing Him after that, but like he only made two films, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the one that's remembered
Yeah.
for whatever reasons that he didn't make anything else. But it was just like maybe he knew that, and maybe he was just like, this is it. Like this is my shot. I'm going for it.
There's the thing that I was thinking about too is that moment in independent distribution, especially in the U.S., where between like 67 and 75, you could do almost anything because the demand was so strong after the Hollywood New Wave started. Somebody like George Romero, who had been a commercial director and industrial filmmaker as well for a decade before he made Night of the Living Dead, and then shot it with his available tools and his skill set, which makes it look just real enough to be convincing, and like it becomes this massive sensation. Easy Rider, which was produced incredibly enough within the studio system, more or
Right.
less, by a movie star, with other movie stars in it, and is this colossal success. And they're both in the same circuit, but they're not really, like, they're all cult films now, but at the time no one knew what to call them. Like,
Right.
that's what I mean about Harder They Come playing in the midnight slots for so long when I was a kid. It's just like everything got lumped into that same box because it was slightly disreputable, just a little bit, unpolished. But I think the unpolished thing is the reason it resonates. I think the sense that you're looking through a window rather than onto a set, that's something that Henzell knew how to do.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if this were a glossy, highly finished film, you're right. I don't like that's an interesting thing that I never thought about in terms of looking at the film, is how much like that aesthetic, if you will, or like the roughness of it becomes part of the experience of watching it.
Yeah, the beat up
Um,
16 millimeter footage actually lends integrity somehow.
yeah, absolutely. And maybe that's what draws me to it even more, is exactly that. It's like you're seeing something that clearly didn't have a ton of money behind it, that clearly was the vision of one person who's just going for it. And the roughness aside, like the story is still there, and maybe that's what adds to it. Like that's what I would expect a movie from Jamaica to look like of the time.
Yeah, even the sound recordings of the actual dialogue, there's some really obvious looping, and it's fine. It doesn't matter. You just get the sense that you were watching people put every last penny into production every way they can and
Right.
making it by the seat of their pants.
And everyone on board with it as well. Like actors committed to it, the camera person's committed to it, the sound team's committed to it. Like everyone's believing in this movie. Like even the villains and like the fights and like the costumes, they're just, Hilton, the recording magnate,
Mm.
he's he's a committed actor to his role, and getting everyone to believe in what you're doing, that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, and maybe it's the aesthetic again that just sort of leads me to. I've only seen it a couple of times, but I'm always surprised. As you say, they're all really professional. They're all actors. There's no sense that somebody's just kind of somebody's cousin who's there for the day, and you almost expect it in a film of this budget where they'll just rope in somebody in the corners. But yeah, everybody gets it. Everybody knows what they're doing, and there's none of the. The other thing I was looking for this time was there's no betrayal of how excited people are to be making a movie. Because this would
Mm,
have been a huge event if it had been produced with like a studio's backing. But because it's a bunch of people just making it by the seat of their pants, they don't have time to be excited. They're rushing like to get the next shot or not to lose the light or something. And it actually creates this little bit of this edge of breathlessness in some scenes that amps up the tension. Everything comes together. It's incredible.
yeah. And I guess it's that energy that you see, like that becomes really clear on screen. Again, like the commitment, but just like how that set would run, I would love to have been there just to see that. What actually constitutes the set. Because even like when they're shooting some of these bigger set pieces, you don't seem like the people in the background, they don't seem aware of what's happening. Like they're not looking in the camera, they're not like looking around, like they're in the moment. And I think that can only happen from people that are of there. He's of there. He understands the locations, the localities, the people involved. And like there's a respect that you see as well of people, of like the actors and of everyone involved of something indigenous, I suppose.
You are watching a culture document itself, right? Like that's the breakthrough aspect of it because it's a conventional narrative more or less, but it's never been done here. It's never been done by people from here, and it makes yeah, it makes all the difference.
The story, yeah, like you mentioned, the story we've seen I would say a million times, but we're familiar with this type of story. But
Mm-hmm.
what we're not familiar with is where it's going to be set and the nuances involved and the story that they're doing. And that's what I think what keeps it fresh because there's even to this date, I mean, like there's been like some of these other Jamaican gangster films have come out, but like none of them are like this because like there's an honesty in it, I think that comes through. And of course, the performances and the songs are timeless.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about Josh Margolin's charming Thelma, now on disc from VVS, and Shout Studios' 4K release of the animated fantasy The Last Unicorn. Yeah, two films that could not be more different if they tried. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. It is just an incredible soundtrack. I didn't want to blow past that just because, I mean, Pressure Drop is playing in the first 5 minutes on a radio somewhere, and it's just like, that is one of the most famous songs of this genre ever.
Yeah.
And that was here. Like, they caught everything. And obviously, like, Chris Blackwell and Island Records are a huge part of that. But again, it's knowing what to take and what to leave behind. It's knowing what to put in the film and what to leave on the cutting room floor, and just how to build this, yeah, like a historical document of how movies are made and how movies were made there for the first time.
I'd be interested to know like what his hopes were for the film. I mean, obviously, I presume he wanted to make some money, but I mean, I wonder if it was like, all right, I want to make the next one. And if, when he makes his next film, which seemed like it was even harder to make than The Harder They Come,
Mm.
like, does he lose his energy? Does he lose his steam? And he's just like, I can't do this anymore. And if there's a sense of disappointment that comes with that, of like really firing on all cylinders to make something that's good. And for the most part, people kind of shrug their shoulders and don't know what to make of the film. Although I think, from what I understand, it did pretty well in Jamaica. But
I would
like,
think, yeah.
but you can't, I mean, you're not going to be able to make enough money back to just off of the Jamaican audience. And so I don't know, like, what his hope was if, like, if you wanted to continue, like, or set up a, some sort of industry down in Jamaica. Like, even to now, like, there really isn't much of an industry that exists in Jamaica, or like throughout, at least in the English Caribbean, there isn't much of an industry. Um, and that's, and I wonder if he wants to change that. Like, people have tried, but it's a hard thing to do. Like I feel like the Spanish language Caribbean has really figured it out with like Cuba and obviously Dominican Republic. They're just
Hmm.
like the gods right now, of cinema that are just really doing innovative work. And why a sort of more structured or sustainable industry hasn't really been created in the English Caribbean, I'll never know.
Is it an infrastructure question? I mean, is it just easier to import at that level?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Like, so many people have tried.
Hmm.
I think frankly, because it's English speaking, you've got access to Hollywood and you've got access to American content, which is what's flooding the market, or the big part of the market. And like there isn't much of a push for, for local content, or at least if there is, it's of a lower quality, and then that just stains everything else, that is good to come out.
Right, the good enough. To,
Yeah,
which I mean, obviously Canada had that issue for a long, long time in
right.
English Canada too, and we're just in the middle of this boom that took 30 years to happen. 30
Yeah.
years and the collapse of celluloid and the arrival of digital as a way to make films independently and cheaply.
Yeah, but I found that now, because you can make a film or at least tell stories with this,
Mm.
it's it's the curation that's the bigger problem, and the exhibition and the distribution, that's like the bigger thing. It's like, how do you get this in front of people? How do you get this in front of eyes? Paying people, that will pay you to make another one. That's becoming increasingly more difficult, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm seeing that too. The 3 years with TIFF, and I'm learning that Canadians will only see Canadian movies if other Canadians tell them to see them. Like, it's this bizarre contradiction. We all believe that we wait until a movie is successful elsewhere to get interested in the people who made it. Like James Cameron, or it wasn't until Sweet Hereafter got the Oscar nominations that
Yeah.
Egoyan really broke and all of that stuff. But ultimately, I think there is, at least with the new generation of audience members, there is a thirst to see themselves on screen, and they want to hear that will be happening from people in their own circle. So like, it's all social influence and word of mouth, but you got to get people to watch the thing first. That's the difficult part.
That is a difficult part. And I think maybe, when The Harder They Come came out, I think that's what happened, right? Like, I actually don't know what marketing and publicity looks like in Jamaica at that time for the film, but word of mouth had to be crazy for this movie,
Oh yeah.
on that, because I'm sure that that theater was raucous at the time, would have been an amazing place to see this movie. Um, just to see a representation of yourself and to hear that coming through speakers, must have been, I would think, a transformative experience for some people.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, and it's clearly, that's like, it's a crowd pleaser. It is designed to be played for a huge audience, and again, a hometown audience, as opposed to will it sell anywhere else in the world. I don't know that they really cared if
Mm,
it would succeed elsewhere. At least to certainly to capture Jimmy Cliff in his element in a recording studio. Everything else is secondary.
yeah,
You're making a movie about a singer who is also a movie star, and then to build an action movie around him, or at least bits of an action movie, and just take bits and pieces that could be fun and have him nail that stuff too. Yeah, that's for the people who know who he is, right? Like, you can wander in cold at a film festival, which is what happened ultimately
yeah,
for the film to sell. But no, this was a movie made for the people by the people.
yeah. And there's a yearning for that, and it's the director's credit that he knew that, right? And it's because I think he came back and he started that, like, studio, that production company was making work. It's an interesting thing when you're making commercials, whether in Jamaica or the Caribbean, or sorry, other places in the Caribbean like Trinidad or what have you.
Mhm.
When you're doing commercials, they're meant for the local community. Like you're not making a commercial there that you think is going to play in the US. Like you are taxed with just selling it to this community. And so I think he became really aware of what people would go for and what people would want, and then threw it all into this movie.
Yeah, and of course the commercials I read in, I think it's in the Criterion essay as well or somewhere, but the commercials were screened in theaters in Jamaica, so he would actually have an audience feedback. He would know what worked and what didn't, right? Like he's already playing to a crowd.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I mean, now there's so many commercial directors or music video directors, and it's like, there's a big thing where, so many amazing music video directors and commercial directors became feature film directors,
Mm.
and vice versa. Like those skills are interchangeable, um, when it comes to it. But I wonder if he's kind of the first person that was starting to do that. I just don't know enough about like the history of cinema to know that, but I think like that's an interesting relationship there.
Yeah, well, and commercials were still so relatively new. I mean, in the late '60s, it was maybe 15 years, maybe not even that, right? Because the original, like the early years of television, it was just people standing in front of a desk with whatever the
With
product
the
was.
product, yeah.
Yeah, this is such a new language, and I mean, it's the same thing that happened in the '80s with music video directors
Yeah.
breaking into film and coming from like Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott apparently recommended the DP. I did not know that, but he was working in commercials. Like
Yeah,
that's how they knew
and
each other.
he came down to Jamaica and made some commercial there, whatever it was. And I think that's where he's making all these connections and, really cutting his teeth in the form. But also when you're building an industry, you get to know who's good at things, right?
Sure.
And you've got to be able to make this film. I mean, film is such a collaborative medium. You need people to do their best work. And when you're working on commercials, they're 1 or 2 day shoots or what have you. You get to know really quickly who the workers are and who the talented people are. And so you can build and you can create that community already.
God, yeah, of course. I mean, we're seeing the same, we always see hives, like cultural hives of creative people forming, but this smaller market, smaller space, smaller talent pool, right? Like there's probably four people who could do the job. And I think based on the way it was edited, they went through all of them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's right. Everybody's getting their shot.
Yeah. And what you end up with is like this absolute murderer's row of talent working
Yeah.
on one project.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's so funny. When you looked at the credits, I was like, oh yeah, I know that person. That person did this. And yeah, it's actually really fun. Like, I mean, the soundtrack again is just remarkable. It's mind blowing. Like, I don't even know what you could like that soundtrack could be made again, like that level of just pure hits where not everybody really knows it, and it's just going off of vibes. And like the songs are so good, they just transcend like any border that you could create.
Yeah. And they were all just floating there. I think they know because reggae hadn't really happened yet. Like Marley was out there, but he was still, I think at that point, he was kind of a curiosity more than an international superstar. And it wasn't until this soundtrack came out that there was a place to find reggae for a lot of people in the UK and North America. Again, that's where Island Records came from. They made their bones with this thing.
Yeah, and I mean that's also like the history of, you know, of migration to these countries as well, right?
Mm.
Because you have like a strong West Indian community in London, in Toronto, in New York, what have you. Uh, like they can spread that culture outwards as well, whether it's the music, and that's what's kind of mind-boggling about Jamaica. It's like how like far ahead they are in terms of cultural production. Like the music is somehow worldwide. The food like is just phenomenal worldwide. In Toronto, I mean, I could throw like a rock here and find somebody that's going to sell me a patty.
Hmm.
And it's just for such a small country, it's I don't know how they did. I don't know how they did it. It doesn't make any sense.
I think it's probably, as much as I hate to acknowledge it, it was probably the colonization, right? I mean, it was the colonial aspect where stuff gets exported and suddenly it's in, well, England and Canada, obviously, right? Like there's a straight line. That culture has been absorbed into our culture, and we just accept that it's all part of it, right? Like reggae music is everywhere, and that's great. It's where it should be. It's permeated, but it started somewhere, and this is like weirdly enough, this movie feels like that place. And the idea that 51 years ago there wasn't a big reggae music scene is incredible to me. Like this is the breakout.
This is the breakout, right? And I think you're seeing that as well. And what makes the film special is like you, I think you know that this is that moment, right? Like you're aware that this is where it started from. And you didn't need like a history lesson, I think, and somebody telling you this is the first time.
Mm.
There's a recognition that's happening there that you're seeing it, and it's like it's clearly this fresh energy and things are working its way through the film itself.
It's a remarkable historical document. I also want to just quickly come back to the whole idea of Jimmy Cliff, lightning in a bottle. You know, there are lots of other incredible performers on this soundtrack, but he is the one we are seeing. And those scenes are absolutely just incredible. I mean, there's I don't know if you've seen the Bob Marley movie that came out earlier this year, but they sort of attempted to recreate some of that energy, and it's fine, but it's like it's an actor in a room. It's not the same thing. Like watching Cliff do it is it's like watching Marley perform live. It's like watching footage of Hendrix at Woodstock. It's like it's an arrival of a musician into a realm where he previously just wasn't. And it's not that he wasn't welcome, it's just that people didn't know he was there.
That's what's, you know, I really like to watch people that are really good at something do it, right?
Mm.
And that can be anything, whether it's like the greatest chefs in the world or the greatest musicians or the greatest athletes, you know, with the Olympics coming up. I'm a huge like I love watching athletics because these are the best people in the world that are doing something and they
Right.
make it look so effortless. And looking at those scenes with him with the music, it's like this is a person that is one of the best people in the world that's doing this. And you see it, and like you're very well aware that this is something special. This is somebody that's extraordinary doing something that only they can do in the world. And I just like I, it's so easy to watch masters, you know, ply their craft and and sort of be in awe of that and just have an appreciation that we're watching something special and we're watching someone do something that no one else can replicate.
Yeah, and it's catchy. Like, that's the other thing. There's joy in it.
Oh, there's so much like what he's talking about is, you know, it's like the again, like the history of religion in the country about colonization, about being oppressed. But yeah, I'm vibing with it, man. And again, it's like I didn't really like I didn't really pay attention to the lyrics until like a few viewings on, and I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, that's what he's really talking about. Man, this song is like, I'm with it, man. It's a vibe.
I'm so glad you picked it and I got to rediscover it. It's been a long, long time since I've seen it. And it turns out, which I did not know and haven't had time to listen to, but I totally blanked on this. There's a commentary track on the Criterion edition that hasn't resurfaced elsewhere of Henzell and Cliff.
No kidding.
Yeah, which I'm
Okay.
now really regret that I didn't have time to listen to it because there were facts there, I'm sure. There's got to be something in there that we can use.
I'll have to search that. I'll definitely have to because I don't have the Criterion version, but I must get it now. I did not know that.
Yeah, and I mean, and since we're talking about filmmaking and everything else and the exportation of culture, that does give me the pivot to get to doubles and your own work. And well, you haven't made a reggae inflected action movie, but you've used pieces of recognizable genre to create something new, both in the short film and in the feature. So yeah, how did you go about doing that?
I think it's like the spirit of, you know, of the harder they come is authenticity, right? I think that's what's at its core in terms of setting like this familiar story in an unfamiliar place, but doing it in an authentic way. That was always my guiding principle. And you know, frankly, even watching The Harder They Come again, there are some moments of the dialogue I'm like, I don't know what that person's saying. And that's okay, right? Like that's totally okay. And I took that same, like, that's what was important for me, is just allowing these characters to speak in a way that's authentic to them and authentic to to the culture, and hoping people get it along the way. And using that as like, when the Jamaicans were able to see themselves on the screen,
Mm.
that's what I was hoping for, that, whether it's people of the diaspora in Toronto like me, or people back in Trinidad were able to look at it, and see themselves as well. Like, to me, that's what I'm trying to do here.
And before we started recording, you mentioned that it's been playing in Trinidad for a while, and that audiences, like, how are audiences receiving it? And were you worried about the crossover aspect of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it's screening in Trinidad and Guyana, and I think Grenada as well soon.
Mm.
And you're because if there are other films that are made in the region, or there are other characters that are transplanted from supposedly from that region and somehow are in New York, when they open their mouth, you catch the inauthenticity. This is like an actor putting on an accent. Or this is a Bollywood actor that they brought in to play a Trinidadian. And
Mm.
frankly, that's like, it hurts. Like, it hurts your soul when you see that, because like there's like an erasure that comes with that, like in a cultural erasure that again, that stings. And so for me to be able to try to do this as authentically as possible and allow people to see that and recognize themselves or their culture and say, yeah, we got that right. That that's why we made it. Like, that's a big part of why I'm making movies, is to try to tell these, you know, these these stories uh, that are not so unfamiliar, but tell them in a different place with different characters that haven't really been seen. Um, that's that's the job I'm trying to do here.
Yeah, it seems like the way stories are being told now, right? Like you can we've reached a point now where there's a sort of collective literacy among the audience. They'll recognize a type or a genre or a form, and then you can just bend it or tweak it or push against it in ways that the audience can connect to, while also still understanding they're seeing something new. Like that fluidity, that fluency is the thing that absolutely fascinates me right now.
Yeah, and that's there's that Bare Naked Lady song that I always hear in my head, that it's all been done.
Right? Yeah.
And it's true, but like, again, when you look at like what Dominican cinema is doing right now, like, they are really reinventing things and pushing the form um, in directions I haven't seen before. And like, that's what's exciting when it's all been done. But there's still a room for experimentation. There's still new for freshness in terms of voice, in terms of storytelling, in terms of performances. That's what excites me about cinema.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're doing it in Canada too. I'm glad we're getting to see that sort of cinema here. People taking risks on an independent level and just seeing where they go.
Well, I think that's what's, you know, to Canada's credit, and to like the funders and the organizations that support work like this. Like, I mean, my film was supported by the Canada Council, by Telefilm, by Ontario
Mm.
Arts Council. And the film, at times, my film, it really pushes back against a lot of the multicultural narratives, and about like, it's very critical at times of Canada, and still, we're being supported by these organizations. And so I think like there's room for that in sort of like this canon of Canadian film. I think that's what's interesting. There are people that are, these new voices that are coming out, that are telling this other side of Canadian stories.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so here for it. And the final question on the podcast is a little awkward this time around, which is there anything from the heart of Akon that I could not find it, that you lifted, borrowed, or outright stole in your own work? I was trying to figure out if there's a connection. It's like,
Oh my
don't.
goodness. Actually, it's kind of fun. It's hilarious actually. When I look back, I'm like, there's a number of things that I frankly ripped off. Not knowingly, not knowing. I gotta be
Right,
honest,
right, right.
not knowingly. But when I look, I'm like, that's exactly like that scene. Um, there's a scene like where like there's like a bunch of guys. He goes to visit the gangster, and like these guys are just playing dominoes or whatever they're playing. I
Mm.
mean, I got a card playing scene in my movie. Like, these people are just playing cards.
Mm.
Um, I mean, some of them, like the musical montage stuff, is I kind of took that stuff as well. Um, oh, actually, how I remember. Actually, it's my goodness. It's when I looked at it, I was like, my gosh, it's the exact ripoff. Like, there's a lot of shots of him on the motorcycle, and how that's shot. Um, I mean, that's exactly from my movie. Like, it's just, I mean, I guess there's only a couple of ways that you can really shoot somebody on a bike, but like
Yeah.
the way they shot that with the sort of lush greenery behind it, where the camera's placed in terms of the framing of him, of Ivan. I mean, it's just, I borrowed it, or paid homage to it.
Yeah, it's not a
Uh,
ripoff, it's homage,
yeah,
exactly.
it's homage, but it's just, it's, and again, just like the vernacular that they're using and like the style of, I can't say the style of the performances I borrowed from, but just like the commitment to the authenticity
Mm.
is again, like I can't, like, there's just no question. When I saw this film, I was like, it can be done. Somebody did it. And that's it's actually really inspiring to see that. And I remember watching this film probably a couple of weeks before I shot mine and just holding this as like, all right, this guy did it. He did it authentically. He did it well. And it was successful in one form or another. And that to me was like when we were on set and like dealing with accents. And I remember one actor asking me, it's like, do you want me to say it like this? Because it's probably gonna have to be subtitled. And that was his decision. I was like, let's just go for it. We'll worry about the subtitles later. The authenticity is more important. Um, and that's what I always took from this movie. And I can say like this is the inspiration for it for sure.
It's not just a breakthrough, it's a blueprint.
Perfect. Oh my gosh, that's a great line. I just remember there was one thing that was really cool in the film when I was looking back at it was like there's that airplane shot and the airplane lands. It's like this long lens shot. The airplane lands. Ivan like runs up to the plane, throws in this bushel of weed, and the plane just takes off. And it's all one shot. And I was like, how did they do this? I can't imagine they did that more than once. But it's a winner. It's unreal.
It's a friend with a plane.
Yeah, it's a friend with a plane, and you've got access to a landing strip somehow.
Yeah. Well, what was it? It was Robert Rodriguez who, when he was making El Mariachi, realized that he had to keep track of everything that was available to him on the day. And it was like, we have a dog, we have a school bus, and what do we do with those? Well, they can't be in the same shop, but I bet we could do two things.
Yeah, the
Necessity
plane
is the mother of
exactly the plane
invention.
shot and like the bushel of weed. Like that I know that prop they had that, but like the plane is just it just raised like the production value immediately. It's because I was like, wow, they got a plane to do this to land.
My thanks to Ian Harnarine, whose new film Doubles is available on digital and on demand as of right now. In Canada, you can find it on Apple TV, Vimeo, and Shaw On Demand. Thanks also to Angie Power. She knows what she did. You can find Ian on Instagram at Harnarine, and you can find The Harder They Come on Blu-ray in a comprehensive special edition from Shout Studios. The Criterion DVD is long out of print. It's also available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster as soon as you can. I'll see you next week.